Elliot Marsh was 39 years old on the Christmas morning. His wife left him a folded note on the kitchen counter and drove away in a car he had never seen before. The note had 7 words. He read it once, set it down on the counter beside the coffee he had just poured, and stood there in the quiet of a house decorated for a holiday nobody was going to celebrate in it. The tree was lit. The stockings were hung. There was a wrapped gift on the ottoman he had purchased in October and kept hidden in his truck since then, because she had mentioned it once and he had listened. Outside, the street was empty and gray, and the neighborhood was doing what neighborhoods do on Christmas morning, staying inside, staying warm, staying whole. She had been planning it for at least 11 months. He did not know that yet. What he knew, standing in his kitchen at 7:14 in the morning on December 25th, was that the joint account had been drained to $340, that her closet, when he checked, was 2/3 empty in the organized way of a person who had made multiple trips over multiple weeks, that the car she drove away in was a lease in her name alone, opened 4 months ago, that the wrapped gift on the ottoman was still there because she had not come back for it. What Vanessa Marsh had not stopped to consider, not once in the 11 months she spent engineering her exit, was what her husband actually did for a living, not the title on his business card, not the modest office park he drove to in the mornings. What he actually did and what he actually held, and how far back the preparation ran. She had spent 9 years next to a man she had fundamentally misread, and she was about to discover, in the space of 6 days, exactly how expensive that misreading was going to be. By New Year's Eve, Elliot Marsh would own her father's company. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee grew cold beside him. He had grown up in Gastonia, the second of 3 boys, raised in a split level off Franklin Boulevard by a woman named Celestine Marsh, who worked dispatch for a regional trucking company for 22 years and understood, better than most people Elliot would ever meet, how things moved. Not just for everything. Information, money, leverage, people. His mother had a phrase she used when one of her boys came home angry about some injustice at school or on the block. Before you get loud, get clear. She meant it in the logistical sense, the way she meant most things. You didn't call the wrong terminal about a missing shipment. You didn't sign a release before you knew what was on the truck. You got clear first, then you acted. Acting before clarity was how things got dropped. She had been gone 6 years. He still heard her when the situation called for it. He had gone into supply chain management the way most people go into their calling, sideways, through a series of accidents that turned out not to be accidents at all. A college internship at a regional distributor in Hickory. A mentor there, a quiet man named Vernon Oakes, who had built a logistics consulting practice from a single client and a legal pad, who had pulled Elliot aside after 3 months and told him he had a gift for seeing the whole board. Most people looked at the piece in front of them. A few looked 2 moves ahead. Elliot, at 22, was already reading the structure of the game itself, the pressures underneath the moves, the places where force was accumulating in the gaps nobody was watching. He had spent 17 years building on that. He ran a supply chain consulting firm out of a modest office park in South Charlotte, 7 full-time staff, a client roster that included 3 regional manufacturers and 2 national retail chains, and a revenue model that had cleared $4 million for the 3rd consecutive year. Every client he had came through a referral. He did not advertise. He did not have a marketing budget. Understating his capability had never felt like false modesty to him. It felt like maintaining the advantage that came with being underestimated by the people who would eventually be sitting across a table from him. The second business, held through a Delaware company administered by a Charlotte attorney named Claudette Ferris, who had been doing this for 30 years and had seen everything, was not visible from the street. It held 4 equity positions in companies he had consulted for and believed in, 2 commercial properties in the Charlotte metro, and a cash reserve his accountant described, with professional restraint, as substantial. Vanessa had never asked what substantial meant in numbers. He had never offered. She knew he was comfortable. She did not know he was the kind of comfortable that could acquire a company before the calendar turned. He drove the same F-150 for 7 years. He wore the same brand of boots to job sites and an unremarkable blazer to client dinners. He tipped well and quietly. His mother had called this being raised right. He called it dignity. He had never found a reason to separate the two. He had renovated the house himself, a 1958 ranch on a wooded lot in South Charlotte, over the first 2 years of their marriage. He had laid the kitchen tile by hand, every row level. He had built the back deck from raw lumber he had selected himself at the yard, board by board, on 4 consecutive spring weekends. The house looked modest from the curb. Inside, it was exactly what he had set out to build. That distinction mattered to him in a way he had never needed to explain to anyone. He had met Vanessa at a logistics conference in Nashville. She had been consulting for a hospitality group, sharp and composed, the kind of woman who asked follow-up questions at presentations that demonstrated she had actually been listening. He had asked her to dinner, and they had talked for 3 hours about supply chain philosophy and incentive structures and how human decisions scaled across systems. Driving back to his hotel, he had thought that this was the thing people meant when they said they had met someone. That particular quality of recognition, the sense of someone reading from the same page. He had been right about her intelligence. He had been wrong about what she planned to do with it. The signs, in retrospect, were there for a man who read the board. A new phone explained as a work upgrade, 3 months before Christmas. Late evenings with friends whose names he didn't recognize, offered casually and without detail. The questions, careful and conversational, about the consulting firm's client contracts, specifically about the terms and duration of his engagement with Alderman Fabrication, a regional manufacturer that was also, though she did not know this and had no reason to suspect it, partially held through his Delaware company. Individual questions meant nothing. Together, they described a person mapping the structure of something she intended to walk away from with maximum effect. He had noticed, he had not concluded. A logistics man did not move on incomplete information. He gathered, he cross-referenced. He waited for the picture to become whole. Then he moved. Preparation was the work. He read the note again on Christmas afternoon. 7 words. I need something different. I'm sorry. He photographed it with his phone. He placed it in a manila folder. He filed it in the back of his desk drawer, where he kept the things he needed to sit with before he touched them again. Then he opened his laptop. The discovery did not take long for a man who had spent 17 years reading the whole board. He pulled up the joint account first. The $340 balance was the product of 23 separate transfers over 11 months, each one sized below a threshold that might trigger a flag, collectively moving $4,100 to $600 to an account he did not recognize. He was not angry about the number. He was interested in the architecture of it. 11 months, 23 transfers. She had researched the thresholds. She had been deliberate and patient and thorough in a way that told him something he had not known before. She had been planning this longer than anything else they had built together. His hands didn't shake. He opened the mortgage account next. Current. She had not touched the mortgage, probably because a missed mortgage payment would have triggered a call to his cell from the bank. She had been precise about what she took and what she left alone. He noted this carefully. It told him something about her risk tolerance and about the confidence she had in her exit timeline. Then he ran a search, available through the commercial data service his firm subscribed to for acquisition due diligence, on the vehicle lease. The registration traced to a management LLC formed in Virginia 8 months ago. The registered agent on that LLC was shared with a second entity. The listed manager of the second entity was a man named Preston Hale. He knew that name. Preston Hale was Vanessa's college boyfriend, mentioned twice in 9 years and filed under old history closed. He was currently the operations director at Alderman Fabrication. He was also, Elliot understood now, the reason for those questions about contract terms. Preston had been asking through her, how long does Elliot have full access to our books? How long before this becomes visible to him? He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions. He did not call her. He did not call Preston Hale. He opened a new folder on his desktop and named it simply December. He made one phone call that evening, Claudette Ferris. She answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring. He told her everything. Account numbers, LLC names, the registered agent, the timeline, and the connection through Alderman. He was precise and he was brief. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, how much do you know about Alderman Fabrication's current financial position? He said he knew enough. She said, tell me. Alderman Fabrication was 60% owned by Vanessa's father, a man named Gerald Voss, who had built the company from a metal shop in Concord in the 1980s and operated it well for 20 years before the industry shifted and Gerald could not shift with it. The company carried $3, $1 million in short-term debt on a line of credit due for renewal in February. The primary lender had already issued a covenant breach notice in October. Gerald had been quietly seeking a buyer or recapitalization partner for 7 months through an intermediary, without success. Elliot knew this because Alderman was his client, 2 years inside those books. He knew the load-bearing walls and the cracks in the foundation better than Gerald did. Claudette said, "And what are you thinking?" he said. "I'm thinking I'd like to own it." Claudette was quiet for a second, in the way she was quiet when she was deciding whether what she was about to say needed to be said. She said, "That's an $8 to $12 million move before structure, Elliot. I want to make sure you're doing this for the right reasons and not just the immediate ones." He understood what she was asking. She had seen clients make acquisition decisions out of anger, out of wounded pride, out of the need to prove something in the moment that they would not care about in 3 years. She needed to know which conversation this was. He said, "The company is worth saving. The debt is distressed and the bank wants out. The workforce is good. The fundamentals are recoverable with proper operations management. Those are the reasons," she said. "All right, I'll call Franklin Lowe at First Regional first thing Thursday." "What do you want the offer to look like?" he said. "Clean and fast." He hung up and sat for a moment in the still house. The tree lit in the corner, the gift on the ottoman, the quiet of a structure that still stood even after the person it had been built for had walked out of it. He was not angry. He was clear. Those were different things, and the distance between them was where most people lost. Thursday morning, he placed one more call to his Uncle Desmond, his mother's younger brother, the only person in his life who had known both versions of Elliot, the boy in Gastonia who delivered groceries after school, and the man who now held equity positions in manufacturing companies and did not discuss it at dinner. Desmond answered from a job site in Colombia. He could hear equipment in the background. He told Desmond a condensed version of what had happened. Not everything, the shape of it. Desmond was quiet for a while, long enough that Elliot heard the equipment sounds change in the background, a pause, then resuming at a distance, like Desmond had stepped away from the noise to think. Desmond said, "Your mama always said Vanessa was watching your books too close." Elliot said, "I know she did." Desmond said, "You sleeping?" He said, "Fine." Desmond said, "Then you're not making a decision out of hurt. That's what I needed to know." He paused. "You remember what she used to tell you about a load you can't carry?" He remembered. His mother's other saying, the one she didn't cross-stitch. "You don't hold up a wall that's already decided to fall, baby. You step clear and let it come down." Desmond said, "Let it come down clean. Whatever else you do, let it come down clean." He said, "Yes, sir." He meant it. He went home that Thursday evening and made dinner. That detail mattered. He had thought about it on the drive, whether to eat out, whether to make something simple, whether to behave differently in any way that she might notice and read. He decided the answer was no. He decided that because it was the right tactical answer, and because it was also simply true, he was not a different person this week than he had been last week, and he saw no reason to perform otherwise. She was in the living room when he came in. She asked how his day was. He said it had been productive. He asked if she had eaten. She had not. He made pasta, the simple kind, with olive oil and garlic, and whatever was in the refrigerator that needed to be used. They ate at the kitchen table, and she talked about a call she'd had with a client, and he asked 2 follow-up questions that demonstrated he had been listening, and she answered them, and then they cleaned up together. She had no idea. He watched her move through the kitchen the way he watched everything he needed to understand, not with suspicion, but with attention. She was performing normalcy as well as he was. That symmetry, he thought, said something. 2 people at a table, both sitting on the shape of what came next, both too disciplined to show it. He was the one who knew both sides of the table. He went to bed and slept well. 3 days passed. Claudette worked the way she always worked, without drama, without unnecessary conversation, with the precision of a woman who had spent 30 years in rooms where carelessness cost people things they couldn't recover. Franklin Lowe at First Regional received her call Thursday morning and her written offer by Thursday afternoon. The offer was for the full note at 92 cents on the dollar, cash with a 15-day close. The bank, which had been carrying the Alderman debt as a classified asset since October, accepted by end of business Friday. On Friday evening, Elliot sat at his desk in the South Charlotte office park and reviewed the purchase agreement. He signed it at 6:47 p.m. He scanned and sent it to Claudette. Then he sat for a moment and looked at the frame cross-stitch his mother had made. Before you get loud, get clear, and thought about Celestine Marsh at her dispatch console on Franklin Boulevard, tracking 40 trucks across 4 states, knowing exactly where everything was at every moment. He had come from that. He had never stopped coming from that. He had gotten clear. He drove home. He did not look at the gift on the ottoman when he came in. He went to bed and he slept well. The call to Gerald Voss happened on December 30th. Elliot placed it himself, because Gerald deserved to hear it directly and not through a layer of intermediaries. Gerald answered with the guarded tone of a man who had been fielding bad news for most of a year. Elliot told him, without preamble, that he had acquired the Alderman Fabrication debt note from First Regional, that the close had completed that morning, that he was not calling to accelerate the debt or to threaten the company. Gerald said, "What are you calling to do?" Elliot said, "I'm calling to discuss a path forward. I've been inside your operations for 2 years. I know what's broken and I know what's recoverable. I'd like to meet after the new year. The workforce stays. The Charlotte plant stays. You stay on as a senior consultant if you want to. Your industry relationships have genuine value. But the operations management changes." A long silence. Gerald said, "Does Vanessa know about this?" Elliot said, "I imagine she's about to." He said it without satisfaction. He stated it the way an engineer states a load calculation. Here is the condition. Here is what it means. Here is the consequence that follows. Gerald said, "She told me you didn't know the first thing about what the company owed." Elliot said, "I know." Another silence. "Longer this time." Gerald said, "I'll meet with you in January." Elliot said, "I'll have Claudette send the calendar." He hung up. He sat for a moment. He thought about his mother. He thought about what it meant to see the whole board, and to move only when you were certain, and to let things come down. Clean. Some things you didn't need to say. The paperwork said them instead. The meeting with Vanessa happened at his office, not at the restaurant she suggested, not at the house, not on ground she had chosen. Neutral space, professional on his terms. She arrived with her attorney and with the composed expression she wore when she believed she was managing a situation. She sat across the conference table from Elliot and from Brenda Tolliver, the dissolution specialist Claudette had referred, 30 years in complex asset dissolutions, who had reviewed the December documentation in under an hour and called Elliot the next morning to say, with professional quietness, that she had seen worse and that he was in a very strong position. Vanessa opened her own folder. Brenda Tolliver placed 4 documents on the table. The first was the joint account statement, 23 transfers, 41 600s, 11 months. The second was the Virginius LLC filing with Preston Hale's notarized signature and the shared registered agent. The third was the purchase and assumption agreement for the Alderman Fabrication debt note. Elliot's Delaware Holding Company, December 30th, fully executed. The fourth was a printout of Preston Hale's Alderman employment record, which showed as of January 2nd that his position had been eliminated in the operational restructuring. Vanessa read through them one by one. She spent the most time on the third document. Her attorney leaned over and said something quiet into her ear. Elliot watched her face move through its stages, the composed confidence first, then the recalculation, then the understanding arriving the way it always arrived for someone who had underestimated a quiet man, in a wave, and then all at once. She looked up at him. She said, "You bought my father's company," he said. "I bought a distressed debt note from a bank that wanted off a classified asset. Your father and I are in early discussions about the company's path forward. The workforce is intact. The Charlotte plant is running," she said. "Elliot," he said, "I'm not angry. Not as a performance, not as a strategy." He actually was not angry. He was free. "But I am going to be thorough. That's what I need you to understand." He stood up. He gathered his copy of the documents, placed them in his folder, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Brenda Tolliver would handle what came next. That was what you paid a precise and experienced person to do, so that you could walk out of the room and let it be handled. He walked down the hallway and out the front door into the January air. He stood in the parking lot and breathed. The sky was flat gray, the kind of gray that was not threatening anything, just present, waiting for the day to decide what it was. He drove. 14 months later, Elliot Marsh stood on the floor of the Alderman Fabrication plant in Concord and watched a line of workers move through their shifts with the ease of People who had stopped worrying about whether their company would exist next quarter. The debt had been converted to equity. Operations had been restructured under a new director, a woman named Cecilia Park, 20 years in manufacturing management, referred by 3 separate industry contacts, and better than all of them had described. Revenue for the year was up 22%. 3 positions had been added in November. Gerald Voss came in on Tuesdays with a legal pad and his 40 years of industry relationships. They had reached an understanding, not warmth, exactly, but the functional respect of 2 men who understood that the company's survival was more important than the circumstances of its transfer. That was sufficient. It was the right size of a thing. He was seeing someone, a logistics attorney named Diana Carr, who had argued against him on a contract dispute 2 years before with a precision that had made him think, sitting across that table, that he wanted to have dinner with her. He had called her 6 months after all the relevant paperwork was settled. She had said yes without performing surprise. She asked good questions and did not require performance from him. She was present in the easy way of someone who did not need to be the story's center. That was enough, more than enough. He heard through the industry network that Vanessa and Preston Hale had resettled in Atlanta, that the Virginia LLC had been dissolved, that her consulting practice had contracted significantly. He registered this the way you register weather in a city where you no longer live, with a passing note and then nothing more. He did not gloat. Celestine Marsh had not made a son who gloated. She had made a man who worked and watched and moved when the board called for it, and then moved on. On a quiet Thursday morning in February, he stood on that plant floor and listened to machinery doing what it was built to do. He thought about his mother at her dispatch console on Franklin Boulevard, tracking trucks, reading the whole board from a chair in an office most people would have found unremarkable. He thought about what she had known and never needed to announce. He thought about what she had given him without ever naming it. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. Some structures, he thought, only become visible from the outside. Once you've already stepped clear and let them come down. He let the morning come in around him. He drove. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.